I'd like to now spend some time helping you understand the concept of identities in Microsoft Entra ID. So the thing to be aware of is that the terminology's changed a little bit over the years. For the decades, we always referred to objects as user accounts, computer accounts, and I'm not saying you can't still do that. In fact, a lot of people still do. I'll occasionally still say it, but the newer terminology that Microsoft likes to use to refer to these objects is the term identity. All right, so you're going to see that term identity versus the word account a lot these days. All right, so with Entra ID, you want to remember that it is going to be the central repository, the central directory services that store these identities. And user identities can be created directly inside, user device identities, all that can be created directly inside of Entra ID. You can also have things synchronized from on-premise Active Directory, also known as ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. And so that information can be synchronized out to the cloud. So you can have identities that are just created into the cloud, into Microsoft Entra ID. You can have identities that are stored on-premise and that are synced to Entra ID. All right. So the multiple ways that you're going to manage identities, the Azure portal, which is portal.azure.com, is one of the most common ways that you'll get into Entra ID and manage identities. There's also the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, which you can get to at admin.microsoft.com. So usually, if you're working with Azure services, you're going to spend your time on portal.azure.com. If you're working on the Microsoft 365 side more, you'll spend your time on admin.microsoft.com. Keep in mind, there are certain things you can only do through one portal or the other. Okay. For example, I can't manage and I can't add licenses and all that through the Azure portal anymore. I can only do that by jumping over to admin.microsoft.com. Another thing we have is the Entra portal, intra.microsoft.com, where I can manage identities and all of that as well. Another option, of course, is if you are synchronizing your on-premise user accounts out to Microsoft Entra, then you can use your Active Directory services for that. So if you're familiar with working with the various tools in Active Directory users and computers and all that fun stuff, then you'll use that for managing a lot of your user settings. Then those settings will get synchronized to the cloud. And then, of course, there's command line options for working with identities. There's PowerShell, which is one of the most common ways. We'll use what's called Microsoft Graph to interact PowerShell to Microsoft Entra. And then there's Azure CLI, which is a bash-based type of system. So for you that are familiar with Unix and Linux, bash and all that, you would feel more right at home if you're doing command line stuff using what's called Azure CLI, the command line interface. Let's take a deeper look at the various types of identities now. The first type of identity, one of the most common, is user identities. So user identities, these are going to be, human users, usually, right, who are going to be accessing your services. So you have what are called member users. These are going to be typically employees that are going to be created directly in Entra ID, or they could be synchronized from on-premise Active Directory out there into Entra ID. And then you also have what's called guest users or external users. These users are going to be invited through something like a B2B collaboration, a business-to-business collaboration, something along those lines. So the idea there, their identity is managed in their home directory where they're granted limited access. You can kind of limit what guest users get access to in your environment. Next up, we have what is called a service principal. Now, if you go back a couple of decades, we used to have what were called service accounts. You may say you don't have to go that far. Well, a couple decades ago, we used to have to create user accounts, and we would assign user accounts to our services, and things could get a little difficult in dealing with that because it was an actual user account and people would forget to deal with that user account. So as time has gone on, they created what was the idea of a service account. And then, of course, in Entra, we have what is known as a service principal. These are going to represent applications or services that need to authenticate and access resources. Now, you can create these manually. However, one thing that's really nice is that when you register an app with Microsoft Entra, it'll create one automatically for you. Okay, and so it's great for assigning permissions, some running automation, or securing access without having to have human interaction. Okay, you can, however, manage the credentials. You can manage passwords and certificates and all that, and there is some manual overhead involved there if you want to manipulate it at all. An example of this would be a web app that needs to have read-write access to, from Microsoft Graph, or maybe to access the Azure Key Vault, which is where encryption keys and all that are stored. So these are great for web-based type of applications. All right. So then we have managed identity. And at first glance, this is going to sound a lot like the same idea as a service principal, but if you'll bear with me, I'll explain the difference. So these are special identities for Azure resources. This is going to be utilized for things like virtual machines or what are called function apps that are going to be performing actions, and they're going to be used to access other Azure resources, and it all happens securely. And the great thing about this is you're not having to store any credentials at all, okay? So there's no credentials that you're having to manage, and that's going to be one of your differences right there between this and a service principal. Okay, there's two types. There's what's called a system assigned, and this is going to be tied to one resource, and the lifecycle will match the resource. In other words, whatever resource that this is going to be linked to, like VM or whatever it may be, if you terminate that, well, the system assigned managed identity is terminated as well. Okay, and then there's also what is called a user assigned. This is a standalone identity that can be reused across multiple resources as opposed to just a single resource. Here's an example of using this. You have an Azure VM accessing storage account, and it's going to use a assigned or a system identity to access that storage account. Storage account in Azure VM terminology is simply a place to store data outside of the VM itself. Okay, so just kind of looking at the differences here. When I think about a service principal, going back for a second, you can create it manually or it's registered by an app. You manage its credentials like passwords and certificates. You can control the restrictions and all that on that. You can use it for logging on and authenticating with Azure. It's flexible, but it can also work inside or outside of Azure itself. So it can work with third party and all that. That's really good. Okay, but ultimately, you'll be responsible for securing rotating key, encryption keys, and all that if there's any of that involved. All right, and then with managed identities, there's no need to manage any secrets or credentials. Azure will deal with all that for you. It's only going to work within Azure, though, so it's not meant for third-party services like a service principal is. Okay, and it can be a system assigned, meaning one identity per resource, or user assigned multiple resources. Okay, and then I guess if you want to look at this from a simple analogy term, then I would say a service principal, you give your app a key to building, and you're responsible for changing that key when needed. So if you use an encryption key for building a web app or something like that, you'll be responsible for dealing with the encryption key yourself. With a managed identity, Azure gives your app encryption keys and updates, and it all happens automatically. So you're not having to deal with all of that stuff. But just keep in mind that, as I said, managed identities are only going to work within the Azure space, not third party. Okay. And last up, we have device identities. So this would be the equivalent of what we called a computer account back in the day. Of course, nowadays, we're not dealing with just desktop computers and laptops. We're dealing with smartphones and tablets and all of that fun stuff. We're dealing with different operating systems from Windows to iOS, Android, Linux, all of that. So Mac OS. So ultimately, though, a device identity is a way to represent a device to Microsoft Entra. Each device that can join Microsoft Entra, or maybe if it's hybrid joined, will get an identity in Microsoft Entra ID. These device identities can be used in conjunction with conditional access, which is, of course, going to control whether or not you're allowed to connect in and access any resources that we have to offer in Azure and Microsoft 365. It also involves compliance policies, which makes sure that our devices are at a certain level of security compliance before they're allowed to access resources. And we've even utilized this with Intune, which is Microsoft's MDM, Mobile Device Management, Mobile Application Management service, which is what's going to set policies and rules and regulations and all that. And actually, Intune can work in conjunction with conditional access and compliance, which is also on the screen there. But Now, there's sort of three ways of looking at a device identity when it comes to Microsoft Entra ID. You have what is called an Entra ID joined device, and that is a full-blown device that is linked into Entra ID that we as a organization can completely manage it. We can put all the rules in the world on the thing, whether it's a device, laptop, desktop, you get into the smartphone, tablets. If it's Entra ID joined, we have complete control over it. Okay. Then you got hybrid AD joined. This is also kind of goes hand in hand with Entra ID, but hybrid AD joined would be if you've got a device on premise that's joined to a Microsoft domain and then it's being synchronized out to the cloud. So we still generally would have control over it, but we would also not only be dealing with it in Entra, it would also be dealt with in a Microsoft domain environment as well. And the last one is Entra ID registered. And that's where things get a little confusing because people say, well, what's the difference between joined and registered? It's actually very simple. Joined, if it's Entra ID joined, we have full control over it. It's usually a business-owned device. If it's Entra ID registered, then it's BYOD, bring your own device. It's usually a personal device that somebody owns that they want to interact with our resources. So that's going to be using a scenario where, let's say you have somebody that works from home and the company didn't buy them a computer. They're using their own computer from home. Well, while they access resources that we offer through Azure and Microsoft 365 and all that, we still need to control what that device can and cannot do, right? So we can't restrict the device and lock the device down as much as we can if it's Entra ID joined, but we can restrict what it can and cannot do with our resources. Same thing with smartphones and tablets. So that's the idea of Entra ID register. We have some control over it while it accesses our resources. And we can make sure that there's certain things, like, for example, if you have a device that's not updated, we can just deny it access. And until they update their device, they can't get access. So that's the idea, though, of an Entra ID registered. It's going to be for personal BYOD type scenario, bring your own device, whereas joined means it's usually owned by us and we have full control over it. So hopefully now in this video, with this video, you have gotten a better understanding of the concept of identities in Microsoft Entra ID. I now want to take a look at the various ways we can create user identities using the various portals. Now, it really doesn't matter what portal you deal with in the cloud services of Microsoft. They're all going to tie back to Microsoft Entra, all right, Entra ID. So here I am on portal.azure.com. I'm going to click the menu button, and I'm going to go down here to Microsoft Entra ID. And then from there, I'm going to click Users. And right out of the gates there, you'll see I can click to create a new user. So create a new user. I can also invite an external user or a guest. So I'm going to click to create a new user. All right. And then from there, it's going to ask me what the user principal name is. Now, what's a user principal name? Well, that's going to be sort of like a username, email address type name. Okay. In my case, it's going to say examlabpractice.com. Your case, it may not. If you're doing this with me, it may say something like something.onmicrosoft.com, which is fine. But I'm going to go right here. I'm going to create a user named Greg Johnson. And the user principal name is Greg Johnson at examlabpractice.com, which means if I associate email address and all that to it with Exchange Online or whatever, that would be the email address. But I'm going to go down here now. It says mail nickname. That, again, that will be the email address, nickname, Greg Johnson, derived from the user principal name. I'm allowed to change that if I want. And then I've got display name. I'm going to say Greg Johnson for that. Okay. And then, of course, I can give this user a password. Or it will auto-generate one. Now, if I choose to give it a password, something that I know, keep in mind that it will force the user to change that password when they first log on. Okay, and then, of course, saying account enabled, that means account will be enabled when the user is created. Of course, I could have the user disabled, and maybe I'm creating the account, so maybe Greg Johnson's going to start work in the next 2 weeks, and then I would enable it when he starts. That'd be, why you might use that. By the way, Microsoft does like to change these portals about every week, so don't be surprised if your screen looks a little different than mine. The main thing here is to understand the concept. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next, and then this is where I could fill out other profile information or properties information. These are user attributes that identify this user and also can be used for associating things in Microsoft Entra. So I could say, okay, first name Greg, last name Johnson, And then, of course, user type, this is going to be a member as opposed to a guest or external user. Guest or external user would be a limited type of user. It has limitations on it, on restrictions and stuff like that. We can put restrictions on it and limit what it can do a little bit more. You've also got authorization, where you could add what are called digital certificates and all of that with this. We're not really looking into adding certificates in this video, but I'm going to go down here, job title. We'll say that Greg Johnson, maybe he is the sales manager. And the company, say exam lab practice is the company. Department is sales. All right. Keep in mind, one of the great things about identifying some of these attributes about the user is that they can be associated with things like groups and all of that. When you want to say, okay, I want to create a group and I want everybody to be a part of this group that's part of the sales department. Okay. So that's really cool. So pretty neat stuff that you can do, that you can look at later down the road. Okay, office location, maybe this user is located in New York. That's the office location. We can specify manager, address information. Okay, but that's enough. We filled out enough information. We'll go ahead and click next. So this is where we could assign the user to a group, all right, which we can group users together to grant them access or give them access to various things. And then, you know, it could be associated with teams and all of that good stuff. We've also got add roles. This gives permissions to things. And then you have what's called an administrative unit, which is going to involve grouping things together to give admins over certain groups of users, certain what are called administrative units of users. So in other words, if I have an admin that needs to control rights over a certain group of people, we can do that. Not in this video, we're not diving into the details on that, nor groups or roles. But, you know, this is all stuff that you can learn as we continue on here. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and click next, or next to review create. So we've now filled out everything here, and then we're going to go ahead and click to create. So I want you to notice that when we created this user through the Azure portal, we had certain options available to us. All right, and now we're going to jump over. If we click on users, well, let's just verify that Greg is there. And by the way, if you do this with me, you're not going to see all the same users as me. But if you create a Greg Johnson, you should see Greg Johnson. But now what I want to do is I want to jump over to admin.microsoft.com. So let's go over there. So this is the Microsoft 365 thing. Side of things, and you should know that by now that Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Entra with Azure all linked together. They all share the same directory service, which is Microsoft Entra ID. So when I get to admin.microsoft.com, if I drop down users and I click active users, we should be able to search for the word Greg here, and we should see Greg Johnson is located here. Okay, so let's go ahead though. We're going to create a user through this screen now, through this portal, add user. All right, so notice it's a little different. A lot of the same information, but a little different. So this time I'm going to create a user named John Smith. And then display name, John Smith, username, this is a user principal name, John Smith. Okay, we could say automatically create the password, or we could set the password to something we know, which of course, when the user logs on, they will have to change their password. We could also, and you also can select that to force that, right, if you want. Then we'll click next. So one of the things that you'll notice you can do that you didn't see in the Azure portal is you can assign a license. Now keep in mind, you may not have the exact same licenses as me that I have on this screen, okay? But this is also where you could assign licenses, okay? You also select a location. In my case, that'll be United States. All right, I'm not going to assign a license for right now. And then I'm going to click next. This is where I could assign roles. Okay, roles will involve permissions. Again, not getting into that right now. Then I got profile, so this is where I could fill out profile information. So in the case of John Smith, we're going to say he is a IT, let's say IT, let's make him a manager as well. So IT manager. He's part of the IT department. He is also part of the New York office. We can specify office phone, mobile, all of this information if we wanted. We're going to go ahead and click next. And then at that point, we're going to click to finish creating the user. So now John Smith has been created. We can search the name John. There is John Smith. Okay. And again, if we go back over to portal.azure.com, and we take a look at Microsoft Entra from there, we should again see that this is all linked together, right? Because it's all tied to our Microsoft Entra. So going back over to users and searching the name John, there is John Smith. Okay, now I want to go to intra.microsoft.com. This is the Entra portal. Okay, this is a newer portal that Microsoft has introduced. So we'll go over there, and right up under identity here, we'll go to users, all users. Okay, and right there, you should be able to search for John. Okay, and you should also be able to search for Greg. Okay, and then if we click to create a new user, all right, you're going to notice that this is the equivalent of what we saw in Azure. So I'll create a username, Bob Jones. So Bob Jones. Okay, that's all fine. Display name will be Bob Jones. I can set a password for whatever I want it to be. Let's try that again. That might help if you uncheck the checkbox, right? There we go. And then if I wanted to auto-generate, I could. I'm going to enable the account. I'm going to click Next. And then we'll specify the properties identity. We'll say Bob Jones. Okay. I wanted to say member. We could say guest if we want. I wanted to make the user a guest. Job title. Bob Jones will be a finance manager. We'll just make all three of these people managers. Okay. Company, exam, lab, practice. Okay. Department, finance, and then we could fill out other information if we want, but we're not going to. Okay, we're going to go ahead now. We're going to click Next. Not going to assign any of that. We're going to click Review and Create, and then we'll click Create. So we've now created Greg Johnson. So we've created we've now created Bob Jones. So now we've created 3 total users: Bob Jones, or Greg Johnson, John Smith, and Bob Jones, and we did all of that using these 3 different portals. All right. Well, hopefully that gives you an idea now of the common ways that we would create users in Microsoft Entra ID. I now want to talk about how we can invite guests or external users to our environment. Now, this is used in a lot of these scenarios where perhaps we've hired a consultant, contractor. This is like a B2B business type scenario, and we want to give some access to somebody that's not part of our organization. So let me talk about how we can do that. Here we are on portal.azure.com. I click the menu button and I go down to Microsoft Entra ID. We'll just go over here to users, and you'll see the option. If I click new user, I have this option that says invite external user, and I can click that. So this is where I could specify the person's email address. So the idea here being that you're not going to be assigning an email address from the company to this person. In this case, they're going to be using their own email. Now, is it possible to assign a company email to a guest? Yes, but I'm not getting into that right now. I would specify this person's personal email. So let's say that this person is a consultant, okay? And we'll say that the user's name is Todd Jones. So I'm going to say Todd Jones, and then whatever at Gmail. I don't want a real Todd Jones to be emailed right now, so we're just going to say Todd Jones 7845 at gmail.com. Okay, I'm going to assume there's not really a Todd Jones 7845 at gmail.com, but that would be this person's email address. Okay, and then display name Todd Jones. All right, I can send an invitation. Say, hey Todd, welcome aboard. Maybe this is a contract, for the next 6 months or something. We could also have somebody else emailed, like myself, jc@examlabpractice.com, CC'd on the email. Okay, and the invite redirect URL, this will be the URL that gets created for that. If I had some kind of custom one I wanted to use for my company, I could, but as you can see here, this is the one that it created. All right, so I'm going to click Next, and then we specify the user's name, Todd Jones. All right, and this user is a guest. Same type of information you fill out for a regular user. We'll say this person is let's say, marketing consultant. Okay. and then, whatever, maybe the user, Todd Jones Marketing is the name of his company, okay, whatever. And he's part of the marketing department, right? So we could fill out all this information, and we'll go ahead and click next. Let's usage location, we'll just do United States. Okay, that's fine. Next. And at that point, we could add it to a group, add it to a role, whatever. Not going to do that right now. I'm just going to click review and then invite. So here's what's going to happen. And you're welcome to try this. I encourage you to try this in your own environment. Try sending your personal email a guest invite if you're doing this stuff with me. Okay. But Todd Jones is going to get an email. Okay. And that email, he'll be able to click that email. In fact, if I go to www.office.com and I'm logging on to Office 365 like a user, go right here. Let's look at apps and we'll go to Outlook. All right. Remember, I had the email that's going to CC me. And there it is right there. Microsoft invitation. John Christopher invited you access. This is what the email looks like. And the person can accept that invitation. And at that point, they'll be able to log on. They can log on to Azure resources and access resources. And we can grant them resources if we want. Now you can also go to admin.microsoft.com on the Microsoft 365 side of all of this, and then drop down users. Don't click on active users, but click on guest, and you can see there's Todd Jones. But if I wanted to click to add a guest, watch what happens. So really, you just get redirected back to the Azure side. If you want to create a guest, you go through this wizard here, invite a new user, and it's the same exact process. Okay. Well, hopefully that now gives you a better idea of how you can invite guests with Microsoft Entra ID. Now on the Microsoft 365 side of things, here on portal.microsoft.com, if we drop down the user's blade, we've also got a little feature called contacts, and we can very easily click add a contact, and we can add user information here if we want. So if we had a contact for somebody we wanted to stay in touch with, we could add, like, we'll say George Carlson. Email address, we'll say gcarlson 9001@gmail.com. Let's say that was the person's email. We could specify profile information, all of that. You can even add mail tip information about this user. And then at that point, or this person, and from that point, we could also even say hide from my organization global address list. So this would be contacts that that specific people could locate if they tried to plug it in. If I don't check that though, then it's going to show up for everybody. At that point, I click add. All right, and once that's added, it'll tell you that it could take up to 30 minutes for your change to take effect. It doesn't usually take that long. Let's jump over to Outlook and see if it's already showing up for my users. So if I go over to portal.office.com, all right, and then we'll click on Outlook. Once we get into Outlook, we will go down here. Let's click on right here where it says people. And let's look at all contacts, and there you go. George Carlson is showing up, so that is a user that I could now interact with. Or an email address I could now interact with. I could send an email to that person. So that is how we can create contacts within our Microsoft 365 environment that all of our users can see. One more thing, if I jump back over to the portal.microsoft.com, you'll notice there is an add multiple contacts option. So what you can do is you can download a CSV file with headers or a sample. This is basically like a spreadsheet you could open up if you wanted to. And you could take a look at it. It gives you an example of how you could import users in. So if you had a copy of like a spreadsheet with a bunch of contacts in it, If you formatted it properly, you could just import that in with the help of that CSV option. So this is how you would do it. You would format that spreadsheet, and then you would browse to it, add the contacts, and would import them in. I now want to spend some time helping you understand the idea of groups in Azure, Microsoft 365, and Entra ID. Now, before we go too deep into this, I also want to clarify that really this all ties to Entra ID. So whether you're talking about Azure, whether you're talking about Microsoft 365, or any of the cloud services that Microsoft offers, remember that Entra ID is the directory services repository where the various identities are stored. So that's going to include user identities, groups or group identities, as well as our device identities and all that fun stuff. So ultimately, it really all ties back to Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD. Okay, so there are 4 group types. I'll tell you that 2 of these are the most common groups, and if you want to know what the most common group is, it is the Microsoft 365 group. The second most common group that's used is a security group. We're going to talk about all 4 of these, and I'm going to go into more detail on each one. I'll give you a quick overview of each one right now. The Microsoft 365 group, again, is the most common type of group that we use out there. It can do almost everything in terms of what you would want out of a group. And what do you want out of a group? Well, one of the main things you want out of a group is to be able to group objects together and then be able to allow them to have access to various types of resources. And of course, with Microsoft 365 group, you can do that. It can be associated with Teams and SharePoint and all that. So it's a very, very powerful, common type of group that everybody uses. There's one thing that a Microsoft 365 group cannot do. It cannot contain device identities. So you can't put device identities in it. If you want to control devices like a desktop machines, laptops, smartphones, tablets, you can't use a Microsoft 365 group. That is what a security group really brings to the table. The second type of group is a distribution group. This goes back to the Exchange world where we had distribution lists. This was a group you could create. The group gets an email address, and then you can email the group, and it goes to the email would go to everyone in the group. Then you've also got what is called a mail-enabled security group. That's number 3 there, and that group also gets an email address, but can also be given permissions to resources. But unlike a Microsoft 365 group, doesn't support all of the crazy features that it does, like creating a team and SharePoint and all of that. Again, we're going to dive deeper into that in a moment. Just again, giving you an overview. The last one is a security group. Security groups are strictly used for permissions. The big claim to fame for a security group is that they can contain users, but one of the big things that it does is you can put devices in this type of group. So it's great for controlling resources. So if you're using something like Microsoft Intune and you need to control what these devices can do and access, and for controlling resources with those devices, the security group is the greatest way to go about it. All right, let's take a deeper look now at our 4 group types. So we'll start with the main one, the Microsoft 365 group. Again, this is the most common by far group. It used to be called a Office 365 group, and then before that, in the early days, they called it a unified group. So the name has changed a few times. It wouldn't surprise me if they changed the name again in the future. But anyway, Microsoft 365 groups, these are collaboration-ready groups. They will automatically include a shared mailbox. So anybody in the group can if you email the group, it goes to the copy of the email can go out to everybody that's tied to that group. They have a shared calendar, so you can put things on a calendar involving the group, and everybody can see it that's in the group. SharePoint site, can create a SharePoint site, and people that are part of the group get access to that. OneNote and Planner, all of that links together. It also integrates with Microsoft Teams. So Teams is a big part of this as well. So it's used as the backbone for Microsoft Team. Anybody that's in it automatically gets access to Teams if they've got a Teams license. It enables chat with them. They can do meetings and file sharing. It also supports guest access, so external users can be added to communicate and utilize this group. And it supports what is known as dynamic or assigned, which involves you can manually put people in the group, or you can also handle it automatically using what are called dynamic rules, which towards the end of this little video, I'm going to explain that a little bit better. So if you don't really understand the difference between dynamic and assigned, stay tuned, okay? All right. The second type of group is a distribution group. So a distribution group has an email-only functionality. It's meant to sort of be like a distribution list, meaning you create a group, it gets an email address. So for example, if I created a group called marketing that was a distribution group, it would get an email address like marketing@examlabpractice.com. Anybody that you put in the group, if somebody emails marketing@examlabpractice.com, the email would go out to everybody in the group. Okay. Keep in mind, a Microsoft 365 group can do that as well, but a lot more. So distribution groups are kind of an older type of group. They've been around forever, going back to the Exchange, early days of Exchange, back when it was just called a distribution list and all that. You have what's called manual or dynamic. So sort of the same idea as what you saw with dynamic or assigned. The manual or dynamic means you can statically put people in the group, or it can be dynamically controlled based on filters. So it's a little different than this idea of what we have Microsoft 365 dynamic, but it's the same basic concept. You can automate membership of the group, okay? You have internal communication, primarily intended for internal announcements or department-wide emails. The big thing that you can't do with the distribution group, the key thing to remember here, it doesn't have access control to anything. You cannot assign permissions to resources like SharePoint or Teams or any of that. So can't be used for that sort of thing. All right, the third type of group we have is a mail-enabled security group. So this gives you a dual purpose. You have a security group that gets an email address, essentially. It can be given permissions out to resources and all of that good stuff. Okay, so it's email capable. You can assign permissions to it. Has a shared email address, allowing group members to receive messages like a distribution list. Access control can be used to manage access to things like SharePoint, OneDrive, Intune, other resources, but no collaboration features. It does not include Teams, shared calendar, or document libraries like the Microsoft 365 group does. So that's the thing to not get mixed up on. You're not going to automatically create a team. It's not going to automatically create a SharePoint site or any of that. It's not going to support any of that collaboration stuff. So just remember that, okay? Now, the final group we have is called a security group. So security groups, it's primarily going to be used to assign permissions to resources like SharePoint sites, apps, and Intune policies. It has no email functionality, so you can't email a security group. The big claim to fame, the big thing to remember, is that with a security group, not only can you contain users, but you can contain devices. And you'll notice I've highlighted that on the screen for you because that's a very important key point I want you to remember. So it can support users, devices, and service principals for flexible management and all that. It also does support dynamic and assigned rules, meaning you can manually add people to the group, or it can be dynamically managed with what are called dynamic rules. Speaking of which, let's explain a little bit more into depth about what dynamic and assigned groups mean. Okay, so when it comes to Microsoft 365 groups and security groups, you can utilize what is called an assigned version of that group or a dynamic version of that group. Okay, an assigned group is more of a traditional style of group. You create the group and then members are manually added or removed by an admin. Okay, although you can delegate somebody as an owner of the group and they can manually add and remove people as well. So this is best for small teams or fixed membership. So if you don't have a lot going on, this is an easy group to set up. It's very simple to set up and control, nothing too complex. Okay, now a dynamic group, the membership is going to be based on rules. So for example, I can create a rule that says every user that has the letters HR in their department property of their user account are automatically a member of this group. So if I created a group called HR, then everyone that has HR as their department property for their user identity, well, they automatically become part of this group. And it's really nice because if a user was to move departments, okay, let's say somebody joined the HR department, but then it turned out that they were better with finance than they were HR, and we moved them to the finance department, well, as soon as you change that department attribute, they would no longer be part of that group. Okay, so users and devices are automatically added, removed as attributes change. Okay, it's ideal for large organizations that need and have automated management. This is going to be perfect for that. So that is the difference between an assigned group and dynamic group. And hopefully now you have a better understanding of the different types of groups that we have available in the Azure Microsoft 365 world and Entra ID. I'd now like to take a look at how we can create groups within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So here we are on admin.microsoft.com. And of course, the first thing to note here is to just be aware that Microsoft changes these portals constantly. So if your screen looks a little different than mine, just be aware of that. I know you probably heard me say that a lot, but I do like to warn people. All right, so here I am. I'm going to click on Teams and Groups, and I'm going to click Active Teams and Groups. So this is where your groups are going to be managed within this portal. And also be aware you are not going to see the exact same groups as me. Okay, so right out of the gates here, you can see that I can add, it says Teams and Microsoft 365 Groups right here. Then I've got Distribution List right here. And then I've got Security Groups right here. And so you'll notice that under Security Groups, I've got add a security group or a mail-enabled security group. So there is where you sort of get your 4 types of groups that we can support. Microsoft 365 groups, distribution list, which is a distribution group, and then a security group or mail-enabled security group. So that's where you can create your different types of groups. We're going to create a Microsoft 365 group. So I'm going to go right here under Microsoft 365, and I'm going to click Add a Microsoft 365 group. So we'll click that. All right, and then at that point, I want to give the group a name. I'm going to call it the finance group. Maybe it's going to represent the finance department. We'll click next. And then this is where I would add an owner. So what is a group owner? A group owner is a user that can add or remove members, delete conversations from the shared inbox, change group settings. Group owners can also rename the group. They can update the description and things like that. All right. I'm going to go right here. I'm just going to add myself as the group owner. jc@examlabpractice.com. So I'll select myself. Notice that it says that JC has access to Teams. So that means I have a license that can support Teams. All right, so I'll go ahead and click next. And then this is where I would add my group members. Okay, now interestingly enough, you'll notice it's not giving me an option here to make this a dynamic group. So in this Microsoft 365 Admin Center, it's not giving the option to use what is known as a dynamic group here. All right, but it says group members have access to everything in the group, including group content like email messages, files, and a shared calendar. By default, group members can invite guests to join your group, but they can't edit group settings. I'm going to add members. We'll add, I got a user named Bob Jones. I'll just add Bob Jones, but really doesn't matter. And again, if you don't have the same users as me, that's not a big deal. You can just add yourself if you want. But I'll click type Bob Jones. I'm going to click next. And then I'm going to give the group an email address. So it says Microsoft 365 groups allow team collaboration by giving them a group email and a shared workspace for conversations, files, and calendars. Choose settings for your Microsoft 365 group. So I'm going to call this finance. So if you were to email finance@examlabpractice.com, it would go to everyone in the group. Then you have privacy settings, and you'll notice it says public or private. Public groups can be joined by everyone without getting approval from the group owner. Anyone can access the group content. Private groups aren't open for everyone to join, and group owners are the ones that can add members, right? So only members can access the group content. I'm going to say private. This is called the finance group, for crying out loud. So we wouldn't want this to be a public group probably, right? Okay. I'm not dealing with roles right now. All right. And then add Microsoft Teams to your group. So if you wanted to create a team with this group, you would actually choose this right here. And this would actually create a Microsoft team. All right. So then I'm going to go ahead and click next, and then I'm going to click to create the group. And as you can see, it's adding the group right now. It's also adding the owner. It's adding the members. whoever's going to be a member of it. And there you go. We've now got this group created. If we hit close, we can go right here and we can search. You'll see the finance group. Okay. All right. Notice that it's an assigned group, right? It is not a dynamic group. All right. Now we can go to the properties of that group. We can click the membership, see who the members are. Now this is going to be, when I look at membership, this is owners. I can look at the actual members by clicking this. All right. I can learn more about permissions, about teams and all that by clicking this link. Channels, this will involve Microsoft Teams as well. Currently there'll be just a channel called General if you were to open up the team for this. And then I've got group settings right here. Not using sensitivity labels, not even getting any of that right now. Most of these settings you'll see involve teams, but if I did want to switch this to public, I could. Let people outside the organization email this team, send copies of Teams email and events to team members' inboxes. Don't show team email addresses. Most of this is pretty self-explanatory, right? But don't show team email address in Outlook. So you can allow members to edit their sent messages, allow members to delete their sent messages in Teams. For Teams channels, Teams members can add channels and edit existing channels. Team members can add and edit private channels. Team members can delete channels. So if you wanted to alter some of that stuff, you could. Okay, but we can only have this group be an assigned group if we create the group through the Microsoft 365 portal. If you want to have dynamic groups, that's where you'll do that through your Azure portal. Okay, but in this video, I just wanted to show you how you could create and manage a group within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. I now want to spend some time helping you understand the process for creating and managing groups through Microsoft Azure. Now, before I do that, I want to remind you that it really doesn't matter where you create a group. It's all going to end up in Entra ID. This all ties back to Entra ID. So whether it's created through Azure or through the Microsoft 365 side of things, or through the Entra portal or PowerShell or the Azure CLI, which is like the Bash way of doing it, it's all still happening in Microsoft Entra ID. Okay, but let's take a look at how this works inside the Azure portal. So here I am on portal.azure.com. If I click the menu button and go down to Microsoft Entra ID, okay, I'm going to then click on the Groups blade, and this is where I can start working with the groups. All right, I'm going to go right here. I could click to create a new group, and I could see all of my groups by clicking on All Groups, but I'm going to click to create a new group. All right, and then, so right out of the gate, it's going to ask me what type of group I want to create. And I want you to notice that you can only create 2 types of groups through the Azure portal. Now, if you do this through the Microsoft 365 portal, you can create 4 types of groups, but through the Azure portal, you can create the 2 types of groups. And these are actually the 2 most common types of groups that anyone ever creates. All right, security and Microsoft 365. The other thing that's interesting about doing this through the Azure portal is that you can also do assigned or dynamic groups through here. Okay, so we'll start with looking at how I could create a Microsoft 365 group first. So I'll select that, and then I'll give it a name. This is going to be called the sales group, and notice that it can get an email address. It is a Microsoft 365 type of group. Okay, so it can get an email address, and I can have a description for it. Also, it says Microsoft Entra roles can be assigned, so this gets into giving out roles and permissions and all that, which I'm not doing in this video. Then I've got membership type assigned, so I could make it a manual type of group, an assigned group, where you select and specify your members if you want manually, or you can do a dynamic group where it can be done dynamically, okay, which is what I'm going to go with. Sensitivity label, you may not have that in your environment. I have implemented sensitivity labels, and that's outside the scope of what we're learning right now in this video, okay? But that gets into sensitivity and compliance and all that stuff. But don't worry about that if you don't see that in your own. If you're doing this on your own right now, don't worry about it if you don't see that. Okay, but let's talk about what a dynamic user is. Okay, so I can do assign, that's manual, or dynamic user. So if I do dynamic user, let me specify group owner first. So I will do that, and I'll just say JC, I'll be the group owner. So John Christopher right here, select. But here is where you're going to set your dynamic rule. So a dynamic query. So a dynamic query is going to be what decides who's a part of this group. Okay. So if I go and I click add dynamic query, and dynamic queries are going to be based on rules that are based on what we call expressions. This expression is going to contain some properties and then what is called an operator that decides whether or not you are part of this. Okay. So let me show you an example. So if we go to property, look, these are all the properties that you can have with users. Let's go with department, and let's say equals, and we'll put sales. Okay. So department equals sales. And you don't have to worry about case sensitivity and all that. It's not case sensitive. So we'll go ahead and add, that'll be our expression. I'll click this white area here, and then you should see the save button appear. Also, you'll see the rule syntax. Now, back years ago when dynamic rules came out, you used to have to learn the syntax, and you can still do that. You can still write your own syntax, but now with this little drop down, it makes life a little easier. But also, if I wanted to, I could say add another expression. I could say or, and then the property will be, let's do job title. So even if they didn't have the word sales as their department, we'll say if their job title, we'll say, let's say add all and any, ends with, equals, greater than, in, less than or equal to, not equal to, starts with, not starts with. Okay, we'll say starts with the word sales. Okay, so maybe you have like different titles, sales manager and things like that. Then that would also put the person in the group. If we put and, then that would be, it would require both of these, right? But or means it only requires one of these. Okay, so at that point we're going to click save, and we've saved that. Now we're going to click to create the group. All right. Now if we come over here to all groups, and keep in mind you won't see the exact same groups as me. I'm going to search for the word sales. And there is the word sales. Notice it says membership type is dynamic. Microsoft 365. We'll open that up. Expand where it says manage. Okay, you can click members, and you'll be able to see, let's go all members, and you'd be able to see members that are part of this. Now let me go ahead and warn you that when you first create one of these, it may be up to 15 minutes or so before you'll start seeing membership show up in here. All right, so don't be surprised if you look at this and you're not seeing any members right out of the gates. Okay, you can see dynamic rules by going right here to dynamic rules, and if you wanted to change that, you could. All right, now let's go ahead and let's create another group. This time we're going to do a security group. So I'm going to go right over here, and we'll say, let's go, just click this groups, all groups breadcrumb. We'll click to create a new group. This time I'm going to do a security group. Okay. And at that point, we can give the group a name. All right. So perhaps we want to create a group that will contain devices, and maybe those devices will be, we'll say, Windows device. Let's say we got Windows. How about this? Let's say New York Windows devices. So maybe we have a location that's in New York, and we want all Windows devices to automatically be part of that as long as they're in New York. Okay. So what we'll do, we'll switch this to, notice we have dynamic device. We didn't have that with Microsoft 365. We just had dynamic user. That's because Microsoft 365 groups cannot contain devices. Very important to remember that. Okay, so we'll go here. We'll set that to dynamic. We can set an owner, JC. All right. Remember that you can't manually put people in a dynamic group or devices in a dynamic. You cannot manually if it's a dynamic. Only assigned groups will allow you to manually. Okay. So the owner can still do things like, rename and manage a group, but they can't add or remove things if it's dynamic. So we'll go right here, add a dynamic query. Now let's say that all of our devices in New York, start with the letters NYC for New York City. So if you have that standards, then what I can do is I go right here to choose a property, and then I go to display name, and I'm going to choose an operator, and it's going to be starts with, and we'll put NYC. All right, and that would be how you could do that. And you could also, if you had another situation where maybe they don't all say NYC, and maybe we could say or, you know, maybe they start with the words New York and all that. We could add that. All right, but let's do this. We're also going to say and. All right, because we want it to be Windows. Well, they have this option here, device OS type, and we will say equals Windows. So all Windows operating systems have this attribute, the last few versions at least, going back to the Windows 10 and all of that, have this device OS type property. And they'll automatically identify themselves as a Windows device. In fact, believe it or not, you can actually do that with Android. They'll identify themselves as Android, and iOS devices will identify themselves as iOS. So this is a great feature. Okay. But anyway, I want to create a group that's going to, you know, put devices in the group automatically based on their display name starts with NYC as well as they are Windows. So there you go. We're going to go ahead and click Save, and we're going to click to create, and we've now created our group. Okay. So let's go back over here to let's look at the sales group. Click on Sales again and click Members. And you can see that I have some users that are automatically part of that group. You may not see the same thing as me, but here are some groups, some users that have the word sales in their attributes. So if I click on Greg Johnson, for example, and I scroll down and go to Edit Properties, in Greg Johnson's case, if I click All right here, you can see all the information. You can see the job title has the word sales in it as opposed to the department. So that's why he's part of it. Okay. Well, hopefully this video has given you a better understanding of working with groups involving Microsoft Azure. I'd now like to talk about how we can manage, monitor, and deal with our licensing in Microsoft 365. And this will include group-based licensing as well. So to start with, here I am on admin.microsoft.com. And I can drop down where it says billing and click on licenses, and I can see what licenses are available to me. Now keep in mind, and you might have heard me say this before or may hear me say this again, you may not see the exact same licenses as me, and that is absolutely okay. Keep in mind, every time I create a course, I'm not allowed to create a new tenant. I wish I could. Microsoft doesn't allow me to do that. So my tenant may look a little different than yours, okay? But ultimately, you can see the licenses that I have available right here. The main one I'm going to focus on right now is this one here. This is Microsoft 365 E5. And if I click on that, I can see exactly who this is given to. All right. I could also, if I wanted to assign, if I had more than one, I've only got one in my case, but if I had more than one, I could click Assign Licenses, and I could specify the names of the users, and I could assign that out to the whoever I want. All right, so that is one way that I could assign licenses out to users. Okay, now another way of dealing with licenses is with groups. In fact, let's pretend for a moment that I had 100 Microsoft 365 E5 licenses. I could assign those to a group. I could go to groups, and I could assign based on groups, and whoever is in the group, it would go to those users that are in that group. So I could actually go right here. I could go to Active Teams and Groups. I could click to create a new group. I didn't mean to click team in this case, but click to create a new Microsoft 365 group. I could call it whatever I want. Like I could call it New York MS-365 users. Okay. And I'll put E5 there. And then I can give it a description, click next. I could assign an owner. In my case, I'll assign myself. Add, click next, and then I could add members to the group based on all the users that I want to have this license. And you're not going to see the same exact users as me if you're doing this with me. But anyway, I would go through and I would select whoever I want. This is not something you necessarily even have to do with me if you don't want to. Give the group a name. All right, anyway, ultimately, I'm going to cancel out of that. Ultimately, though, from there, I could go back over here to licenses, go into this license here, and I could add that group. Now, you'll see here it's not going to let me do that because, well, I've only got one license and it's already assigned. If I actually unassigned this, I could unassign it from myself temporarily, and then from there you'll notice it would let me assign it to a group, right? Because I have an available license. I'll go ahead and assign this back to me. All right, kind of important that I have that license in my case. Okay, now so that is the idea. So you can assign a license to a group, and basically if you had enough licenses available, it would go to each person that's in the group. So it's a very easy way to handle licenses. Now, what if you need to go through and purchase additional licenses? Well, in my case, I have this blade over here called Marketplace. Now, depending upon the region of the world you're in, you may see a blade called Marketplace, or under billing, it may say Purchase Services. So be advised, you'll probably see one of the two depending upon what region you're in. You'll either see Marketplace or you'll see Purchase Services. So I'm going to go to Marketplace in my case, and this is where I can see additional subscriptions and licenses and all that. I'm going to click on All Products, and you can see what's available here. All right, so you can purchase a subscription, which is going to give you multiple types of licenses that can be divvied out to your users if you want. In this case, I'll scroll down, and there is like Microsoft 365 Business Basic, Standard, Premium. What's also really neat here that I encourage you to do when you're researching licenses and that you might want to hand out is use this compare feature. A lot of the licenses you see here will support that. In fact, you can compare up to 3 at a time. I just check those boxes, and then it says compare, and then it gives me this nice little table that sort of breaks down the things that I'm going to get out of it. So this is very helpful, and I definitely encourage you to check that out when you are dealing with licenses. All right. Now, as far as being able to monitor who has what license, again, you're going to come right over here to licenses, and you're going to be able to see how many licenses you have available. You'll be able to click on these, and you'll also be able to see who the license has gone out to. Something else I can do as far as monitoring the licensing and all that is I can go right here to show all, and then there is a reports drop down that I can click, and then I can click on usage, and then you can actually click on individual apps that are listed here and look to see what the active users are. I'm going to click on Microsoft 365 apps, and I can see based on this the actual usage. You can see active users, so that's one thing you can do is look at users, and you can also look at group activities as well. So that's something to check out as far as getting some good reporting data in your environment. Okay. So anyway, those are some of the things I can do. I've actually had a bunch of groups over the years that I've used with this tenant and deleted them, so I don't see actual group names for some of the older ones. But anyway, this is just another way that you can look at the overall usage of your environment as far as licenses go. I now want to take a look at creating users in bulk using the graphical portal. So here I am on portal.azure.com. If I click the menu button and go down here to Microsoft Entra ID, I can click users, and then you'll see this option right here. It says bulk operations. Keep in mind, probably heard me say this before, you're not going to see the exact same users I see here, and keep in also mind that they change the screens all the time. So don't be surprised if your screen looks a little different than mine. I'm going to go right here though and click bulk operations, and I have an option for bulk create for creating users. I have an options for bulk invite for inviting users as guests, and bulk delete for deleting. I'm going to say bulk create. And then what it is, they'll create you a little template CSV file. So I can download that little template, and I can open that little template up and take a look at it. Now, if I have Microsoft Excel on my computer, I can open it up in Excel, and that's a little easier to view. So here is what it looks like in Microsoft Excel. Okay. And so essentially what you can do is you can fill out this information. Now imagine if you had gotten this information from like your HR department or something like that, and you could just sort of format these fields as you see here the spreadsheet your HR department gives you, you could format those fields, and then you could import that right in here, and that's how you could create your users. So in my case, you know, if I wanted to, you know, create a user, I'll just call it user 1, and we'll say user 2 and user 3. And then what do you want the user's name to be? In this case, I'll say user 1 at, in my case, it'll be examlabpractice.com. If you are doing this with me, it's not going to be that. If you're doing this with me, it's going to be whatever your domain name is for your tenant. If I go back over here in Azure, let me just open this in a different tab. Your tenant name, if you go back over to portal.azure.com, and again, you got to look at Microsoft Entra ID, you'll see your name right here. So that, in my case, that is examlabpractice.com. Then I can specify what I want my password to be. I'm just going to put a little exclamation point there. And then I'm also just going to copy and paste this just to make life a little easier. So user 2, and this will be user 3. Okay, and then I'll copy this password here. I'm not going to block sign in for these 3 users. So now I'm going to save this template. Okay, in my case, I just saved it on my desktop. So now if we come back over here to our users, and again, all I did is go to Microsoft Entra ID and then to users, and then right over here where we have bulk create, I'm going to click this folder icon, and there is the file right there, and I'm just going to submit that file. All right, and it says file upload successful. It says in progress, so I need to wait on it. So again, the idea being, you know, maybe your company's going through a massive hiring spree, and your HR department gives you like a spreadsheet with 50 different people. They're different users and all of that. You need to have these users created by this bulk enrollment, this bulk operation enrollment. You can do that. So now it says my users have been created. Let me just do a search. And there you go. You can see all 3 users, user 1, 2, and 3. So that is how we can enroll those 3 users. All right, I'm going to delete those because I don't actually need them. Now, if I go over to admin.microsoft.com, let's jump over there real fast. And we go to users, and we'll go to active users. You'll also notice that I have this option that says add multiple users. So this is through the Microsoft 365 portal. And so they have a slightly different way you can do it. You can type the information of the users here, but you also have this option, I'd like to upload a CSV. So you can download, it's kind of the same process, just done through Microsoft 365 portal, okay? Again, it all links back to Microsoft Entra, or Entra ID, so, you know, it's all going back to the same place. Well, hopefully this video has helped you now understand the bulk automation of creating users a little bit better. I now want to help you get a good foundation for understanding PowerShell. Now, PowerShell has been around in our various operating systems since going back to the year 2006. It became a big part of the server world in 2007 when Microsoft Exchange 2007 came out, and it's pretty much been a go-to standard for being able to manage things with command line in the Microsoft world all these years. It is still a big part of administration when it comes to administering things on a bigger scale. Now, one question that comes up a lot of times that I want to just go ahead and answer is this. Students will ask me, why would I want to write out a big long command to do things when I can do things graphically? Well, the answer to that question is, on average, you can actually achieve things faster if you know the commands and do it through something like PowerShell than you can doing things graphically. What might take you 50 clicks of the mouse to achieve one little line of text might be able to achieve that as well. But really, where PowerShell gets its claim to fame is the fact that you can do things in bulk. You can do a lot of things at one time. I can write a little script that might be able to let's say you had to perform those 50 clicks to achieve something on a server or in the cloud. Let's say you had to do those 50 clicks 50 times, right? Well, I could write a little script, a little PowerShell script that basically just does all of that in one fell swoop for you. In other words, it just automates it all, right? So PowerShell can really make things easier for us. And it's a big part of administering things remotely, whether it be our client machines or whether it be servers. It's used in Azure, it's used in Microsoft 365. You start getting into Teams, you get into Microsoft Exchange, Exchange Online, SharePoint, Microsoft Defender, Microsoft Purview. All of the various services out there can in one way, shape, or form utilize PowerShell. So it's very, very powerful. And one thing I'll also say is it's very intuitive. You'll see that if there is such a thing as an intuitive or easy to learn type of command line, PowerShell is it. Now, you might not think that at first if this is your first time seeing it, but just bear with me, okay? First thing I want to tell you is, how do you open PowerShell? Whether, whatever operating system you're in, usually you can right-click the Start button, and it'll either say Terminal or PowerShell. You want to go in as Terminal Admin or PowerShell Admin. That gives you admin rights, okay? And that'll bring you into Microsoft PowerShell. You can also do a search on your operating system for the word PowerShell. Also, if you're in Command Prompt, you can actually type the word PowerShell and get there. Okay, so as I mentioned that PowerShell is intuitive, it utilizes what's called a verb-noun system. That means that when you type a command, the first word you type is going to be a verb, and then the second will be a noun. The verb being an action you want to perform, and then the noun being sort of like what it is you want to perform this action against. And of course, there'll be a dash that separates the two. So a verb like get means I want to get some information. I want to see something. I want to read something. Then you might want to alter what it is you're looking at. So then you use the word set. If you want to delete something, you'd use the word remove. If you want to copy something, you use the word copy. If you want to start something like a Windows service, you'd use start. And if you wanted to stop something like a Windows service, you'd use stop. So for example, if we were talking about services, for example, I could type get, and then I'm going to put a dash, and then I could put in the word service, and I could hit enter, and it's going to show me my services. Okay, now if I want to clear my screen, I'm going to type CLS for clear screen. That just cleans everything up. Now the other thing I want to tell you is that PowerShell supports IntelliSense, which means if I type the word get dash and put the letter S, I can hit the tab key and it'll let me tab through every one of the commands. And if I accidentally pass the command, which I did, I passed the word services or service, I can use shift and I can go backwards. Okay, so there it is. I just passed it again, and I'll go forward by hitting tab. So now it says get service. Okay, so that is very helpful to know, and the IntelliSense part of it is very helpful to know. Now, another thing about the syntax of PowerShell is once you type a command, or what they call a commandlet, that's a commandlet, but most people will just call them commands, get-service, you can put in parameters. Now, a parameter is going to be something additional you want to get or find or do within that command. For example, if I just type get service, you see it lists out all the services. But what if I just want to see the one service called WinRM? Let me clear the screen again. And by the way, I'm going to hit the up arrow and I can toggle through these commands. All right, so I just toggle to get-service. All right. Now I'm going to hit space, and see there's always going to be a space between the commandlet and parameters. You don't ever want to put a parameter right after the command. There needs to be a space. So I'm going to put dash, and then check this out. I can tab through the commandlet or the parameters as well. Watch this. I can tab through every parameter that's supported. So that's really helpful as well. So if I put dash name space, and then I'm going to type WinRM, all right, and notice how it just displays that one service, all right. So that's really nice. I can utilize parameters to display additional information or to filter certain types of information as well. All right, let's type get-service again. all right, space, dash, and then notice that I can tab through. Take a look at that. That's interesting. Dash computer name. And so I could actually display a service on another computer. Like, for example, if I had another computer called Client 10, let's say, then I could display a service running on that machine called Client 10. All right. Now, I can also erase the command that I've got on the screen just by hitting Escape on my keyboard. Let's check out. So I was mentioning that I could type that dash computer name, get dash service dash computer name. Well, there's another way you can actually remote into a computer to run commands. It's called enter dash ps session dash computer name client 10. That's how I get it. Or if it was a server, maybe server 1, I could remote into that computer by running that command. Okay, so that is helpful as well. It lets you remote into machines. Let's run another command, get dash process. This is going to view let me view all the processes that I've got running on this machine right now. Okay, so that's helpful. And of course, I could also see processes running on a bunch of machines at one time. Let me clear the screen. I'm going to say get dash process dash computer name. And I could say client 10, client 11, client 12. And if I actually had real computers out there, I could actually remote into those. As long as I have admin rights, I could remote into those and it would display all the processes. Another thing you can do, of course, it displays all those processes, is you can do what's called out file, which allows me to essentially have the data that would be displayed on the screen show up on into a text file. And I could actually do that by running the pipe command. So what is the pipe command or pipe character on here? And that's the little character above the enter key. If you hold down shift on your keyboard, and what that does is that takes the output from the previous command and plugs it into the input of another command. All right. So in this case, if I say out dash file and I go c:/client processes dot text, it would store the output data into that text file. Okay. And it would be located on my C drive, right? So that's the idea there. Of course, granted, I don't really have those actual computers out there, but if I just ran it like this, backspaced out, it's now going to display it that way. If I type dir, I can see the client processes file right there, and I can actually open up and go to my C drive. Let me open up on my computer. If I open up my C drive and I go to, there it is right there, to open that up, you can see all of that information inside that text file. So that is the idea there. So another thing we can do is search for commands that we are looking for. So for example, you can run a command that shows you all of the commands that PowerShell supports, and then you can filter that to make it a little easier on yourself. So if I type get dash command and I hit enter, you're going to be able to see all of the various commands that are currently in PowerShell in memory right now. Of course, it's taken a little while, but there you go. Now, of course, this gets a little intimidating because you really run through these commandlets and there's just thousands and thousands of them, right? In fact, I don't want to sit here and wait forever, so I'm just going to hit Control-C and then CLS and clear my screen. But what if I'm trying to search for a specific commandlet? Perhaps maybe I'm looking for all of the get commands. Well, I can type get dash command space dash verb get. Now here's every command that starts where the verb is get. Of course, there's tons of those, so I'm going to clear screen. I hit Control-C to exit that. I could also do remove. Let's say I want to see every commandlet that has the word remove as a verb. There you go. Okay, clear screen. How about we do this? Let's change it to noun. And let's search for every command that has the word net as the noun. There is none. So when I hit enter, nothing happens. But check this out. What if I search for every command that starts with the word net? I only want to search a command if it starts with the word net. Well, let's see if there is any. Well, to do that, I'm going to put a star at the end of that word net. That asterisk essentially is a wildcard, and it means show me everything that starts with the word net, and doesn't matter what comes after it. There you go. There's a lot of those commands. Look at all these commands that have the word net, that start with the word net. How about ends with the word net? Let's clear the screen. All right. To do that, we'll put the star at the beginning. There is no commands that end with the word net. Now, if you did want to search for every command that has the word net in it at all, you would put star net star. That's going to show you every command that has the word net in it at all. Now, you can also further filter this. Let's do this. Let's put dash verb. Really doesn't matter. I could have put the verb at the end, and then I'll say the word remove. So show me every command that has the verb is remove and has the word net in it. There you go. Okay, so part of the trick, of course, with PowerShell is just trying to find the command you're looking for, and you can look up help information on that, as you'll see, and then also you can use AI. I'll talk more about that here coming up as well. Now, what if we run a command and that command requires some additional information or additional parameters in order to achieve anything? We can get help on that. For example, there's a command called get-event log. Now, this command will show you the event log on a Windows operating system, all the events, log data on the operating system. The problem is if you just hit enter, it tells you that it's missing a parameter. It has what's called a mandatory parameter, meaning you have to specify a parameter to go with it in order for it to continue. So what I can do, I'm just going to hit enter, and notice that it gives me some red text, all right, which essentially is letting me know that, hey, there's an error here, and it tries to give you a little bit more information than a normal command line does on that. But if I want to get help, I can type get-help, and then I'm going to type the command I want help on, get-event log, and I'm hitting tab to tab through it. All right, and there you go. It'll display that. It'll display the help information. But I'll tell you, I'm not a massive fan of the help output that it provides. I prefer to actually get help by going out to Google or Bing, because Microsoft provides a actual document on all of these. And there is actually a command you can run on some commands that'll just open the page, but I don't like to use that command because it does not every command supported. So please don't message me and say there's a command that you can display the website. The reason I don't do that is because not every command supports it. Okay, I'll show you though. We can do a quick search through Google or Bing, and we can get help on how to run a command very easy, right? So I'm just going to highlight the get-event log and copy that, and then I'm going to open up my web browser, and we'll go to Google and paste that in. All right, so I'm just going to paste that into Google. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to look for, making me show that I'm not a robot apparently. All right, I'm going to look for get-event log, and I'm going to look for this little learn document right here and go there. And here is their help information for get-event log. If I scroll down, one of the things I love about it is they give examples. Yes, there is a way you can run in PowerShell. There are some commands will show examples as well, but I really prefer to look at it this way. So again, I know a lot of people like to message me and say, you can run this to see examples. I love their examples right here on the Learn document. So I can see how to run this command. Like, for example, I love this right here. Get recent entries from an event log on the local computer. So I can see some of the syntax here that what I've got to do is I got to type get-event log, log name, and then the name of the log that I'm wanting to look at. All right, so if I do that in PowerShell, I could actually run this little command right here. You can see the newest entries. We'll see what it looks like without doing newest, and then we'll put that parameter in. All right, so I just right-clicked and it pasted it in. But you can see get-event log-log name. Remember, there is going to be a space let me clear the screen, do it here at the top for you so it's easier to see. There's going to be a space that separates the command or commandlet. There's going to be a space right here that separates that and the parameter, and there's going to be a space between the parameter and then the information going into that parameter. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to hit enter, and there you go. Look at all of this information that it shows. Now, the problem is, I'm going to Control C and clear screen. That stops it. The problem is, I don't want to see all those. Maybe I just want to see the latest 5 entries. So that's where this newest space 5 comes in. And you can see it showing me the newest 5. If I want to see the newest 10, I can say show me the newest 10. Okay, and that's going to, give me some good information. Now, another problem is that it displays all this in a table view, and I don't actually get to see all of the information. It's abbreviated. So watch this. I'm going to hit the up arrow, and then I'm going to pipe this. So I'm taking the output of this command, and I'm going to plug it into the input of another command. And then this command is going to be called format-list. That means format the data as a list. Check this out. So now, instead of showing it as a table view and abbreviating things, it shows it in a list view. So I get all of that. And if I wanted to pipe it again, I could hit the up arrow. And I'm going to pipe, and I'm going to do out-file. Showed you that a minute ago. C:/security log.txt. So now that is all in a text file called security log. Okay. Something else I'll show you is that you can use variables, just like PowerShell is a programming language in of itself. So you can use variables. Variables are words that are associated with an area of memory that you can recall anytime you want. So for example, to call upon a variable, let's create a variable called computer name. Now, variables in PowerShell will start with a $sign. And then we will put equals after that, make sure that's spaced, and then whatever it is you want to put in that variable. So for example, maybe I've got a computer called client10, and this variable is going to contain text. I want to make sure that I put quotation marks there, and I'm going to hit enter. Now I can call upon that variable simply by putting $, and then I can actually tab, hit the letter C, tab, and I can tab through all variables that start with the letter C. Believe it or not, PowerShell has a bunch of variables already in memory, and hit enter. Okay, and you can see that it displays it. So if I was to do get-event, actually let's just hit the up arrow, make our life a little easier. There it is. So get-event log, and there's that full. So let's say I wanted to remote into client 10. I'll put it right here after the log, dash computer name, $ computer name. So now whatever is written here is going to be here when you hit enter. Now granted, I don't really have a computer called client 10 out there, but that's what would happen, right? Variables can be used for calculations and all of that. Like I could say $num1 equals 1. I don't have to put quotation mark there because I'm not storing text. I'm storing a number. $number2 equals 2. Okay, and then I could say $num1 plus $num2, and outputs 3, right? I could change those variables anytime I want. $num1 equals 5. $num2 equals 10. And I could say, let's just hit the up arrow, add those two together, you get 15. Okay, so that is the considerations you have when you think about calculations. PowerShell could do calculations just like any other programming language. The last thing I want to show you in this video is that sometimes you might want to run scripts as an admin in PowerShell, and PowerShell will try to restrict you by default on various operating systems. I've already disabled that. I'll show you how to do it, but there's a command that'll show you if your operating system is going to prevent you from running scripts. And the command is called get-execution policy. Okay? And that means the execution policy tries to prevent you from executing scripts, even as an admin. If I hit enter, you'll see mine says bypass, but if you run that command, it may not. So it may say restricted. So I'm going to type set dash execution policy space, hit dash. That's our parameter. We'll tab through it. Of course, there it is, execution. And then I can tab through the various options here. And the one I'm going to go with is bypass, which means, hey, I'm not going to require any questions or anything like that before I try to run a script. I'm not going to prevent you from running a script. I'm going to let you just bypass the execution policy. Of course, this is a good idea if you're going to be running a lot of scripts and doing a lot of things, so like an admin workstation. Obviously, if you are in a normal environment with users, this would be set to restricted, right? And they wouldn't be able to do that. So you might say, well, what if I needed to run a command against a large amount of machines in my environment? Like maybe I got 100 machines and I want to run a command against 100 machines or whatever. They're all going to be restricted. Well, there's ways around that, which I'm not going to dive deep into in this video. I'll just tell you that you can look it up, and there's directions on how to do it. You can actually use GPOs if they're part of a domain, group policy objects, to set all the machines to like bypass or whatever. So that's how you can do that. Or if you're using Microsoft Intune, you can do it. There's various ways. If they're linked to the cloud, you can use Intune, but there's various ways that you can switch that to bypass if you want. To do it on a single machine, we're going to run that command right there, and that's really what I wanted to show you there. Okay, so wrapping things up in this video, we've now got hopefully a basic foundation of PowerShell. I want to encourage you, again, that anytime you don't understand how to use a command, there's two things I want to encourage you to do. First, Google or Bing search the command, okay? Go out there to Google or Bing, whatever, and search the command and look up the Microsoft Learn article on the command. So Microsoft will have a Learn article on that command. Here it is for this one here. And I can see an example on how to use it, and it'll tell me the various details about that command. Okay, like all sign, there's what bypass means. Nothing is blocked. Here's what remote sign doesn't load. So you can learn how to use these commands. The other thing I'll tell you is use AI to your advantage as well. AI does a fantastic job of helping with PowerShell scripts. So if you've got access to Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever it may be, use that to your advantage because it's really, really helpful, I'm telling you. You know, I can go here and I can type a command like this right here. Let's just copy that. Go back over here and I can say explain this command. Paste that in and it's going to explain to you what that command is going to do. All right, now watch this. I'm going to introduce an error into the command. I'm going to take away this right here. And let's see if it can help me fix that error. I'm getting an error in this PowerShell command. Watch this. Paste. It looks like there's a problem. Yep. There it is. Requires you to specify a log name without the dash log name. So I took that out. See, it knows exactly what the problem is. Okay. So you could use this to your advantage. Use AI to assist you with running PowerShell commands. Okay. So that's my two biggest tips for you. Open up the documents that Microsoft has to help you learn a command, but also use AI to your advantage. Now, before you can really jump in and start playing around with PowerShell involving Microsoft Graph, I kind of feel like it's important to understand what is Microsoft Graph and what is this whole shift to a modern API platform all about. Well, Microsoft Graph is meant to be a unified API endpoint for all the various Microsoft 365 and Azure services. So what exactly does that mean? Well, first off, an API is an application programming interface, and the idea of being unified endpoint is having one central repository that allows us to interact with all of these various services, right? Instead of having to create different tools that have different entryways into interacting with these services, we have a central way to do that. So if you're developer out there, if you're a developer out there and you're developing different tools, whether they're graphical tools, whether they're command line tools, whether they're tools that are going to use AI, it makes sense to have a central way to do all of that, to interact with these services. And this is something they didn't have in the past until Microsoft created the idea of Graph, all right, the Graph API and all of that. And so this is going to be our way for, again, allowing developers to build tools. This will include Microsoft developers, this will include third-party developers, okay, but they can build tools that can interact with Graph, which in turn can interact with pretty much everything. Microsoft Entra ID, Teams, Outlook, OneDrive, Intune, and all the various services out there. So it's a single endpoint. It uses all of the latest and greatest types of internet standards, and this will include OAuth 2.0 and all of that. This is going to support automation, reporting. It can be integrated with the various applications. This will include third-party applications. So there's just a lot of reasons for having something like this out there for developers to use and to make life easier for interacting with everything. All right. So what is the limitations of traditional PowerShell? Well, a lot of you may already know PowerShell's been around since about the year 2006 when they first really developed it. Before that, we used command line options based on the DOS standards, right? And of course, when 2007 came out, Microsoft really started pushing PowerShell with Exchange 2007. And it sort of took off from there as one of our main ways of interacting with servers and all of that. The limitations, though, of your traditional PowerShell is that it's very service specific. You would have separate modules for Exchange, for Azure AD, which of course is now called Entra ID, and SharePoint and all of that. Of course, for years, the PowerShell also has required its own remote methods for remoting into and managing these services like Microsoft Exchange. It's also not very adapted to cross-platform support. It was geared mostly just towards Windows. Okay, it used all the Windows standards for remoting into stuff, right? And then, of course, it used legacy authentication. So basic authentication, and of course, that's deprecated. They're deprecating things these days. Also, it was complex to automate these services, all right, with PowerShell. If you were doing any type of automation across the various services, it could be very difficult because you require different standards to interact with different services. So this is really where the traditional PowerShell model of interacting with things falls apart, and now we need something newer, all right? So why did Microsoft move to Graph? Well, I think that question has pretty much been answered, but let's go over the key points here. Number one, we need unification. We need a unified access model that's going to reduce the complexity of everything. And that's kind of where I've been going so far in this video, right? We need something to unify everything. We need something that can work across the various operating systems, including Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. All right, we need something too that's secure but also future-proof. Okay, so that was one of our big problems. The whole future-proofing has been a problem with PowerShell since going all the way back to the year 2006 when it came out. What would happen is standards would change, and then they have to recreate new commands. Okay. And it just became sort of a nightmare. I know, for example, a good example would be they created a module to interact with Azure AD back when Entra ID was called Azure AD. They had a module of commands that were called the Azure AD commands. Well, then when they got dated, they changed to a new set of commands called AZ, and then they also came out with a different set of module-based commands in PowerShell called the MSOL, the Microsoft Online commands, and then they deprecated that. And all of these have gotten deprecated, over the years. I think some of the AZ commands are still available, but the Azure AD commands are deprecated, the MSOL are deprecated, and that's been an ongoing, never-ending process. So it's important for there to be some type of future-proofing involved here. So with Microsoft Graph, we're going to support token-based auth and conditional access. These are the main standards that we use for interacting with Azure to begin with, Azure Microsoft 365. So the other thing is Graph is going to support your latest and greatest developer tools. It's going to support automation. It's going to enable scalability. All right, it's geared towards performant data access, being able to perform actions and manage and have a nice scalable system to grow over time versus what we had with traditional PowerShell. All right, so Microsoft Graph PowerShell advantages: you get a single module called Microsoft.Graph for the many services. So this one interface, this one set of modules, one module, I should say, that's full of the various commands and tools that are used to interact with the many services that are out there. There's no need for remote sessions. When you use Microsoft Graph, you'll be able to interact directly using HTTPS URL-based standards. So you're not having to use any of the older remote standards that didn't have the security that they needed. You're using the latest and greatest web-based standards to interact with these services. So no need for remote sessions. It's more efficient and it's scalable for doing bulk operations, which is one of the main huge advantages of using PowerShell to begin with, is to perform bulk operations. Okay. Many times people wonder why we even want to run commands to begin with. Well, because you can do a lot of things faster with PowerShell. As I always like to say, you might do something that takes 50 clicks of your mouse to do something. Well, I might be able to do it with one little line of text. But imagine if you had to perform the 50 clicks against 50 things out there on the internet, or 50 machines, or whatever it is. I can run a script that just to say run this against all 50 of the objects or 50 machines or whatever it may be. So PowerShell's advantage has always been to try to make life easier on bulk operations. But now we can really do that without having to worry about various commands across the different types of modules that we had that keep getting deprecated. It's ideal for cross-service workflows, for your job workflow, having a process for managing all these things. Another thing is continuous updates. So it's continuously updated with the Microsoft 365 features. So as the Microsoft 365 services get updated, so does Graph. This makes it where, again, you're not constantly having to download new packages and commands get deprecated and all of that. All right. I'm not saying they might not still phase out certain commands, but the great thing about it is the actual Graph API itself is being upgraded, and that's what you're interacting with, as opposed to the various commands that have logic in them that aren't being updated, and they're having to be removed and phased out and then replaced. All right, so that's going to be the advantages of that. All right, sort of wrapping things up now. Which should use? So we still have we have Microsoft Graph, but there is still the traditional PowerShell tool that some of the commands are still out there. So when should you do one or the other? Well, the key here is pretty simple. Use Microsoft Graph for all modern operation and future compatibility. Use the traditional tools only if there's not a Graph-based replacement. So you can still use some of those older tools, but I would only do it if for some reason you can't do it through Graph. All right, they're pretty much, though, trying to replace all the old commands and all that with Graph. So if you're interacting with cloud services, you want to be using Graph. Organizations should transition to Graph-based tools for long-term support, because that's where Microsoft is going forward. That they're going forward with Graph, full steam ahead on Graph. All right, Microsoft is deprecating many of the traditional commandlets in favor of Graph. So that's the key. Okay. So remember, to put it simply, Microsoft Graph, this is going to be recommended for modern automation and future compatibility, while traditional PowerShell is going to be used only when Graph is not available. That's going to be the thing you want to remember. All right. All right. Well, hopefully this has given you an idea of what Graph is, why it's important. PowerShell is going to be used to interact with Graph. So it's not that you're going to stop using PowerShell. It's just PowerShell is going to use a Graph module to interact with Graph out on the internet, which is going to essentially let you touch all of your Azure and Microsoft 365 services. I now want to learn how we can interact with Microsoft Entra with the help of Graph through PowerShell. The first thing we're going to do is just make sure we're connected, okay? Especially if it's been a while since you've connected. So I'm going to type connect-mg graph space scopes space, and then in quotation marks, I'm going to type group dot read write dot all, and then comma, and then I'm going to put user dot read write dot all, and that should give me access to those scopes. Okay, now if I hadn't logged on already, I would get a little pop-up and I would put my credentials in for Microsoft Azure, which is Entra. Okay, same as with Microsoft 365 as well. Okay, but I am connected in. All right, so now I want to see how we can view, I'd like to view my users in Microsoft Entra. Okay, so I'm going to type, this would also be for Microsoft 365 because remember Microsoft 365 links back to Microsoft Entra ID. So your users are stored in Microsoft Entra, so you're going to see those in all the other services as well. The command I'm going to type is get-mg user -all. And I'm going to hit enter. This is going to view all of my users. All right. Let me just, it's making me verify my credentials again. There we go. So now I can see, now keep in mind if you're doing this with me, you are not going to see the same users as me. I have lots of users that I've played around with and created from various courses. So you won't see the exact same stuff as me. But this is the command that would let me see my users. So as you can see, I can see my users utilizing that command. All right. Now I'm going to go through the process of creating a user. I want to encourage you again to, when you want to learn a command, there is the get-help commandlet. And I could type new-mg user and hit enter, and it's going to display it. But I'm not a fan of that. I prefer to use the help information that they provide. Okay, so they do provide help information. You can see right here, I got this little link. I can go and I can paste that into my browser and take me there, and I can see examples on how to use the command. But I want to go ahead and show you this command myself. Oh, and don't forget also AI. Okay, whether it's Copilot or ChatGPT or one of the other AIs, AI is fantastic with helping with PowerShell commands. It's also fantastic for troubleshooting with PowerShell. Okay, there's no shame in my game. I use it. When I'm working with it, I use it. I love it. All right. So let's take a look now. We're going to see how we can create a user. We're going to type new-mg user space -account enabled, because we do want this account to be enabled, and put a colon, and then whenever you do a Boolean, a true or false statement, you do a colon and then a $, and I'll say true. All right. Then I'm going to do display name, and the user, I'm going to call this user Justin Blakely. It's just a random name I came up with. Okay, Justin Blakely. And then space -mail nickname. We'll just do lowercase Justin Blakely. All right. And then we'll do user principal name. The user principal name is going to be the email address name. Now, in my case, that's going to be, I'm going to say Justin Blakely at examlabpractice.com. Now, if you're doing this along with me, you need to know what your tenant name is. Okay, you'll need to know what that is. If you don't know what that is, then you can go, it'll probably be an onmicrosoft.com name or whatever, but you can go into your web browser, go to portal.azure.com, menu button, go to Microsoft Entra ID, and you're going to see your domain name right here. So that's what you would put in. It's probably going to be like an onmicrosoft.com name or something like that, unless you've got a custom domain name, okay? But I'm going to go back in here. All right, so there it is. I've typed that out, Justin Blakely at examlabpractice.com. Okay, typoed that, but it's not that big of a deal. Okay, so now we'll go here, password policies. I don't want to do password policy. I want to do password profile. All right. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated because it just requires you to put a password in. So I'm going to put @ symbol, and then I'm going to do open curly brace. All right. And we're going to do force change password next sign in. All right. Equals true. All right. And then semicolon, password equals, and then this password. I'll just do password 123 with an exclamation point, and then close curly brace. All right. Now, hopefully I didn't typo anything. We'll find out though, right? Hit enter. Looks like I did not typo anything, so that's good. It did work. All right. And again, I do want to revisit something here. A lot of times students ask me, why would I want to go through all this trouble of typing all this out? Okay, well, for one thing, you can copy and paste. But the other thing is, remember, if you had to create a bunch of user accounts, understanding some of the syntax, or if you needed to edit a bunch of user accounts, understanding the syntax and understanding this can make your life a lot easier. So, in fact, I'll go over this in a minute. We're going to talk about being able to bulk enroll using these commands and all that. So let's go just verify. Let's make sure that that user is created. So one thing I can do is I can run this command again, and I can see that, let's see, Justin Blakely, there he is. But I can also go into my web browser here, open up portal.azure.com, going to Microsoft Entra, right? And I'll expand it where it says manage. I'll go to users. And again, you're not going to have all the same users as me, but I'm going to search the word Justin. And there he is. So you can see that user has been created, right? All right, so I don't really need this user, so I'm just going to delete the user. Okay. Oh, keep in mind, I could also do that in PowerShell. We can do remove-mg user. I don't want to tab through all those, so I'll just put a U. There we go. So that would be the commandlet for that. All right. And okay, so now what I want to talk about, bulk enrollment. So in Intra, we go here, and keep in mind that Microsoft constantly changes these portals, so don't be surprised if yours looks different than mine. But if I go new, okay, when I go to create a user, that's individual user, right? But also, what about if you look over here to the right, you have bulk create. So you can bulk create users as well. So how would we do that with PowerShell? Well, imagine you have an HR department that when new employees get hired, they store their information in a spreadsheet, and maybe they send you that spreadsheet. And then ideally what you want to do is just be able to import that spreadsheet into Microsoft Entra and have those created. Of course, they do provide a graphical way to do that, but we're looking at PowerShell right now. So if I've got a spreadsheet available right here, and there's 3 different columns here. We've got display name, mail nickname, and user principal name. Those are going to be our 3 basic pieces of information we're going to need. And I've just got 3 different fake people I've listed here. Now, you can take that information and it can be saved as a CSV file. And I'm going to save it in a folder called test on the C drive as users.csv. Okay, so we can save that, and you also could just do this through Notepad if you don't have Excel on your computer, which you very well might not. Here is that exact same information as comma separated value format in this text file. Okay, again, I'm going to go File, Save As. I'm going to go to my C drive. I'm just going to create a folder called Test. And then I'm going to name this users.csv. Okay, so that's going to be the name of this file. All right, users.csv. So we'll hit save. Now I'm going to go back into PowerShell. Okay, so there is the command we're going to use to do this is the import CSV command. So I'm just going to type cd space test dir, and there is our users file right there. So now we're going to type $password profile equals. So we're going to declare what we want the password to be for all these users, and we're storing this data in a variable. So we're going to go @ open curly brace, password equals, and then this is the password I'm going to use. All right. And closing semicolon, which means I'm essentially ending that variable. And then I'm also going to say force change password next sign in equals $true, closing curly brace. All right, so we've now basically we've got all that stored in memory, this password profile, and we're now ready to run the command that's going to import the CSV. So we're going to type import -CSV. I'm going to clear the screen first. All right, import -CSV. That's going to be the command that's going to do this. -path. We're going to say quotation, open quotation mark, ./users.csv, closing quotation mark. So we're saying, hey, we want to import that CSV. Okay. Now we're going to pipe that, which means we're going to take the output of that and plug it into the input of this next command, which will be for each -object. Now in programming, you may be aware if you've done any programming, for each is what we call a loop. A loop is where you want to perform an action against multiple objects. In this case, we're going to create a bunch of users against the fields that are inside of our spreadsheet. Notice these are, so we're going to run a command against each one of these three, and I want you to remember these names: display name, mail nickname, and user principal name, because we're going to call those using what is called a variable. All right, to be stored in memory and column. So we're going to say for each, and then open curly brace, which means we want to run a command inside of the command. This is the action we want to run against each field in the CSV file. This will be new-mg user space -account enabled colon. We're going to say $true, means the accounts will be enabled, and then we'll say -display name. All right. And then here's the way you call the variables, call the data that's inside the spreadsheet. We're going to do this little trick. It's called $_. All right, so $_ dot, and then display name, which is what it's called inside the spreadsheet, right? The display name. And then we're going to do the same thing with mail nickname. Okay, mail nickname, $_ dot mail nickname. Okay, and then same thing with user principal name. All right, so user principal name, $_ dot user principal name. All right, so we've typed that in. Now we're going to call the password profile that we just created, password space -password profile, and then $password profile. There is our exact variable. All right. So only other thing we need to do is closing curly brace, and we're going to go ahead and hit enter. All right, and we'll see if it creates our users. It looks like it did, and we can verify that by going over to portal.azure.com and going to Entra, and then our users. We just search for the names. I'll search for Justin first. All right, so there's Justin Blakely. That was our first user we created. There's another one called Sarah Lee. And then the last one that we created was a user named Robert Kim. And there's the user account. You can see it did work. Now I want to show you real quick how we can delete all the users. I am just going to paste the command in so you don't have to watch me type the whole thing out this time, but we'll go here, paste the command in, import -CSV -path, the users for each. We're calling a variable user, get -mg user. We're filtering by user principal name based on what's in that CSV file, and then we're going to run this command, remove -mg user, based on that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and that should delete our users. Okay, coming back in here, if we go back over here to users and we search based on Robert's gone, Sarah's gone, and Justin is gone. So as you can see, we've successfully removed our users by using that command that I've got up on the screen. All right, now I want to show you how, if we wanted to, we can associate licenses for our users. Okay, so we can use a command called get-mg subscribe SKU, and we can see the various subscriptions that our Microsoft 365 services and all that has. Of course, when you look at it at first, it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's all written in this table view. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run this command here, get-mg subscribe SKU, pipe that over to select-object, and that's just going to make it where I'm only going to show certain pieces of information. The information I want to see will be the SKU part number, comma, SKU ID, comma, and consumed units. That's going to show me how many units are available. So we'll hit enter. All right, you can see the subscriptions. This actually is the Microsoft 365 subscription. Okay, you could go into admin.microsoft.com and go to users, look at your licenses, and you'll see the SKU ID and all that, but that is actually the Microsoft 365 license right there. So let's say I wanted to give myself the license, or Justin Blakely or whoever. I could type this command, set-mg user license -user ID. Okay, and then I'll put in jc@examlabpractice.com for myself, give myself a license. I actually had already given myself a license, but I removed it so I could do this demo. But -add a license. But if you want to do this to any other user, this is how you would do it. So add license, and then we'll do open curly brace, and then SKU ID equals, and then this ID number right here. I'm just going to copy that, and then we'll put that in quotation marks. I'm just going to right click. Okay, closing quotation marks, closing curly brace. Okay, then the last bit is remove licenses at opening, closing parentheses. Now, what that's actually doing is that's saying don't remove licenses. I know that sounds weird because that the name of the parameter, but it is saying don't remove any licenses. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter. And at that point, John Christopher should now officially have that license, and it's showing it right there. So that's how we can add a license to a user. And of course, you could write a script to do this in bulk if you wanted to, now that you know that much. All right, last thing I want to show you here, let's look at how we could create a group. So let's say we wanted to create a Microsoft 365 group. We can type new-mg group -display name. Okay, I'm just going to call this test M365 group. That'll be the name of it. Okay, space -mail enabled. True. That means it'll be a group that gets an email address. It's one of the benefits of a Microsoft 365 group. -mail nickname. I'm going to call it test M365 group. That'll be its nickname. Okay. -security enabled. That means, do I want it to be given permissions and things like that? I'm going to say no to that. So false. Okay. -group type. Group types, and then open parentheses and the word unified, which oddly enough, that is the old name of the Microsoft 365 group. So years ago, they were called unified groups as opposed to Microsoft 365. Actually, before Microsoft 365 group, they were called Office 365 group, and then before that, they were called unified. So Microsoft loves to change the names. You probably already know that. But all right, I think I've done everything correctly. I'm going to hit enter, and it's now created my group. So if I open up here, go back into portal.azure.com, go to Microsoft Entra by going here, Microsoft Entra, go to groups. Let's just search for the word, let's go to all groups, and we'll just search for the word test. You may not see the same groups as me. And there it is, test M365 group. All right. All right. And so that is how we can create a group. And I know this is getting longer and longer, but if you did want to add a user to a group, you can use the new-mg group member commandlet, which will allow you to actually add users to the group. But I'm going to leave it with that. I hope this has been instructive to you. I hope you've learned a good bit about just going through the motions of working with PowerShell with Graph and Microsoft Entra. And this is just one of those things you just got to jump in and start playing around with it to learn it. Don't forget, use the Learn documents and use AI to assist you in learning this. It'll make your life a lot easier. And with that said, you're now ready to move on.